There's something fundamentally broken in how we view the past. We imagine a medieval world of cold, damp, drafty hovels, and in many ways, we're right. But that's not the whole story. We look at their simple shelters of mud, straw, and stone, and we see something primitive. We see hardship. What we fail to see is a masterclass in applied physics. Think about your modern home. It's an intensive care unit for comfortable living, hooked up to a constant life support drip of electricity and gas. Now, cut the power in the dead of winter. How long does it last? 12 hours? Maybe a day before the pipes burst and it becomes a life-threatening icebox. Yet for centuries, people in far harsher climates didn't just survive winters that would bring our world to a standstill. They built homes that worked with physics, not against it. So, how did they do it? The answer isn't a romantic story of cozy, firelit cottages. The truth is far more complex and, frankly, more intelligent. The story of medieval winter survival isn't one of creating comfort as we know it, but of a relentless, daily battle to strategically manage energy. They weren't trying to create warmth. They were desperately trying to slow its escape, using principles our own building codes have almost completely forgotten. In this video, we will dismantle the myths and uncover the real, unvarnished secrets of how medieval people built shelters that endured. Section 1. The cold, hard truth, debunking the myth of the cozy cottage. Before we dive deeper, we have to confront the popular myth. The idea that a typical medieval peasant lived in a quaint, warm cottage is largely a modern fantasy, a fairy tale we tell ourselves. Archaeological findings and historical sources paint a starkly different picture. For the vast majority, homes were a constant struggle against the cold and damp. Let's start with the castle. These imposing fortresses, romanticized in film, were a thermal nightmare. Stone has immense thermal mass, meaning it absorbs and stores energy. In winter, this is a fatal flaw when not managed correctly. The massive stone walls acted like a thermal sink, absorbing the chill of the night and leaching heat out of the interior all day long, ensuring the rooms remained perpetually frigid. Add in vast, high-ceilinged halls impossible to heat, and staircases that acted like funnels for cold air, and you have a structure designed for defense, not comfort. Life in a castle wasn't a fairy tale. It was a constant battle for warmth, lived in layers of heavy clothing, huddled near the few, inefficient sources of heat. And what of the peasant's home? The classic wattle and daub house. While its compact size was a critical advantage, these homes were far from the airtight structures we have today. They were built from a lattice of wood, plastered with a mix of clay, mud, and straw. While this was a clever composite material for its time, it was porous and prone to cracking, making the homes drafty. The central fire, often burning on an open hearth with only a hole in the roof for smoke to escape, was incredibly inefficient. A significant amount of warmth was lost straight up the smoke hole, and the interior was often filled with a smoky haze. So, the foundational secret isn't that medieval houses were warm. They weren't, not by our standards. The real secret is how people survived despite the cold, using a multi-layered strategy of clever design, efficient heating where possible, and a complete redefinition of what living meant in winter. It was about enduring through hardship, not thriving in comfort. The first layer of their defense strategy didn't involve technology. It was about common sense, observation, and working with the landscape. Before a single stone was laid, the location and design of a home were critical decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. Medieval builders, especially in colder climates, understood the brutal power of the wind. A home on an exposed hill would bleed heat relentlessly. So, the first principle was using natural windbreaks. Settlements and homes were situated in the lee of hills, nestled into valleys, or surrounded by dense forests. These natural barriers could drastically reduce wind exposure, lessening the constant infiltration of cold air. This was passive design in its purest form, using the land itself as the first wall against winter. The orientation of the house was the next crucial factor. In the northern hemisphere, they knew the winter sun hangs low in the southern sky. Builders would orient the longest side of a house to face south, maximizing exposure to the weak winter sun. Windows, which were small to begin with, were strategically placed on this southern wall to capture every possible ray of light and warmth. The northern face, which bore the brunt of icy winds and got no direct sun, would often be a solid, windowless wall. Beyond location, the very shape and size of the house were fundamental to its thermal performance. This is where the humble peasant's cottage had a distinct advantage over the lord's castle. Heat rises and dissipates. The smaller the volume of air you need to heat, the more effective your fire will be. Peasant homes were deliberately compact, often single-room structures, ensuring that every calorie of heat from the central hearth was concentrated in the main living area. Ceilings were kept low, often just high enough to stand upright. This simple choice had a profound effect. It kept the layer of warmer air from the fire down where the people were, instead of letting it pool uselessly 20 feet overhead, as it did in a castle's great hall. The architecture was brutally efficient, a direct reflection of a harsh environment. This principle of a small, defensible thermal core is something modern eco-home designers are rediscovering today, yet it was an intuitive, life-sustaining practice 1,000 years ago. Now we come to the very fabric of the home. For a huge portion of the population, the go-to construction method was wattle and daub. This technique, which sounds primitive, was actually a sophisticated composite material, created entirely from the landscape. The process began with the wattle, a flexible lattice of woven wood strips, like hazel or willow, set between upright posts. Once this framework was in place, it was plastered with the daub, a thick, sticky mixture of clay, straw, or animal dung, and water. Each ingredient was critical. The clay provided mass. The straw acted as a natural fiber reinforcement, like rebar in modern concrete, preventing the daub from cracking as it dried. From a thermal perspective, its genius lay in trapping air. The loose, fibrous structure of the straw created countless tiny air pockets. Air is a fantastic natural insulator, and these pockets dramatically slowed the transfer of heat through the wall. It provided significantly better insulation than a wall of plain timber, or, especially, solid stone. These walls were also breathable. They allowed moisture vapor to pass through, which prevented the buildup of condensation and mold, contributing to a healthier indoor environment. But let's be clear, these walls were not perfect insulators. Their R value was low by any modern standard, perhaps around R5 to R10 at best, and they required constant maintenance to patch cracks and prevent drafts. Wattle and daub didn't create a warm home. It was simply the best possible defense they could build with the materials at hand. One more piece in the complex puzzle of survival. While the peasant huddled in a compact wattle and daub home, the lord resided in a structure that was, paradoxically, often much colder. The stone castle. Castles were fortresses first, homes second. Their massive stone walls were designed to repel siege engines, not the cold. As we've discussed, stone has high thermal mass, which means it efficiently pulls heat out of the air and feels perpetually cold. So, how did the elite cope? They created insulating barriers inside the stone walls. They didn't live against the cold stone. They lined their walls with heavy, expensive tapestries, hung on frames a few inches from the wall. The tapestries trapped a layer of still air between the fabric and the stone. This trapped air acted as an insulating layer, breaking the thermal bridge and preventing the room's warmth from being sucked into the stone. Floors were covered with thick layers of straw and reeds, topped with carpets, and the grand four-poster bed was another critical invention. A small, enclosed chamber with thick curtains to trap body heat. In stark contrast to the cold, damp castles of Western Europe, a different architectural evolution was happening in the even harsher climates of Scandinavia and Russia. Here, builders perfected the art of the log and turf house, perhaps the pinnacle of medieval passive thermal design. The key was in the materials and joinery. Builders used massive, dense logs from old-growth trees. The sheer thickness of the wood provided substantial insulation, but the true genius was in the scribe-fit joinery. Each log was meticulously hand-carved to fit perfectly onto the contours of the log below it, creating an incredibly tight seal. The small gaps that remained were chinked with sphagnum moss, which expands and contracts with the logs, creating a breathable yet airtight barrier. The roofs were equally brilliant. They often used thick layers of soil and living turf laid over a waterproof layer of birch bark. In winter, this entire roof would freeze solid, and the snow that piled on top only added to the insulation, burying the house in a protective blanket. Their thermal performance was vastly superior to that of a drafty English castle, a design born from the absolute necessity of surviving some of the most brutal winters on the planet. A medieval house was only as good as its roof. An enormous amount of heat is lost upwards, and medieval builders developed roofing systems that were remarkably effective insulators, using nothing more than the byproducts of the landscape. The most common of these was the thatched roof. To a modern eye, thatch looks rustic. This is a profound misconception. A properly laid thatched roof was a thick, dense system that could be over a foot thick and was an incredible insulator for its time. The secret, once again, is trapped air. Each hollow stalk of straw or reed is a tiny, insulating tube. When tens of thousands of these are packed in overlapping layers, they create a thick blanket riddled with millions of air pockets. The thermal performance was so good that on a frosty morning, you'll see frost on the outside of a thatched roof, a clear sign that very little heat is escaping from inside to melt it. Now, claims that it could meet modern building codes are an exaggeration. A thick thatched roof might achieve an R value of R10 or maybe R15, far below the R30 or R40 required in cold climates today. But for the era, it was a game changer. It was also a breathing material, allowing water vapor to escape, which prevented dampness. Of course, thatch had its drawbacks, the most obvious being fire risk. A stray spark from the chimney could be a disaster. This is why it was often replaced with slate or tile in dense towns over time. But for a rural peasant, thatch was the perfect material, cheap, local, and an insulator far superior to any other option available. It was a key component in the overall thermal strategy, the crowning element that kept precious heat from vanishing into the sky. No amount of insulation matters without a heat source. At the center of medieval survival was the fire, but not all fires are created equal. For most, the heating system was a simple, open hearth in the center of the room. A fire was built on a clay platform on the floor, and smoke found its way out through a hole in the roof. This system was a thermal disaster. While it radiated heat to those nearby, as much as 80–90% of that energy was lost straight up the smoke hole. This created a powerful updraft that constantly pulled cold air into the house through every crack, making the home draftier and colder. The invention of the chimney and the wall fireplace was an improvement, but they were still very inefficient, with most of the heat escaping up the flue. The true revolution in heating occurred in the colder climates of Northern and Eastern Europe with the perfection of the masonry heater, known as a Kachelofen or a Russian peck. These were not fireplaces. They were sophisticated thermal batteries. A masonry heater is a massive structure of brick or stone with a long, winding, labyrinthine smoke channel inside. A small, hot fire was burned quickly for just an hour or two. The hot gases, instead of going straight outside, were forced through this extended path, transferring their thermal energy to the immense masonry mass. By the time the exhaust finally exited, it was cool, meaning 70% to 90% of the heat had been captured and stored in the stove's body. For the next 12 to 24 hours, this massive structure would slowly and gently radiate heat into the home. This was comfortable, sun-like radiant heat that warms objects directly. These stoves were often the multifunctional heart of the home, built with platforms for sleeping and niches for drying clothes. While not common in the cottages of England, they demonstrate the peak of medieval heating ingenuity, a shift from constantly feeding an inefficient fire to simply charging a thermal battery once or twice a day. A house, no matter how clever, is just a shell. The ultimate story of winter survival is a human one. It's about how people lived their lives within those structures. First was the principle of shared warmth. Privacy was a dangerous luxury in winter. Bed sharing was a survival strategy. Families slept huddled together under piles of woolen blankets, sharing their collective body heat. This principle extended to livestock. In many peasant homes, living quarters were shared with animals during the coldest months. A cow is a massive living furnace, generating a tremendous amount of body heat. Bringing animals inside protected them, and their body heat contributed significantly to warming the shared space. It was a symbiotic relationship of survival. Clothing was the next critical layer, a personal, portable insulation system. People lived their lives in layers, with wool being the miracle fiber. Wool is an excellent insulator and, crucially, retains its insulating properties even when wet. They wore woolen hats and nightcaps to prevent heat loss from their heads. Finally, there was community. Winter was a time for communal activities. People would gather in a single house to share warmth, tell stories, and mend tools. This not only conserved fuel, but bolstered morale during the long, dark months. The bonds of family and community were, in their own way, as important a source of warmth as the fire in the hearth. This combination of architecture and human behavior created a holistic system where the house, its occupants, their animals, and their clothing all worked together to keep the deadly cold at bay. So, how did medieval houses stay warm at minus 40 degrees? The unvarnished answer is, they didn't. The romantic vision of a toasty cottage is a myth. The reality was a constant biting cold. Medieval people were not comfortable. They were survivors. Their success was not a single secret, but a tapestry of interlocking strategies. It was built on a deep respect for the landscape, the ingenious use of local materials to trap air and store heat, a mastery of fire, and most importantly, it was sustained by human behavior. They fought the cold not as individuals, but as a collective, sharing body heat with family and livestock. They did not conquer the winter. They endured it. Their homes were not warm sanctuaries. They were a testament to human ingenuity, resourcefulness, and an unyielding will to survive. The secret wasn't lost technology. It was a mindset we've traded for cheap energy and convenience, a mindset of resilience, community, and a deep, hard-won understanding of physics. The wisdom was never lost. It was just buried.